Before we get started with today's show, a reminder that the SAG-AFTRA Video Game Actors Union is still on strike, fighting for better protections against AI and misuse of actors' likenesses, voices, etc. Today's game, Mad Max, was made in partnership with and published by one of the companies specifically named in the strike, so you can check down in the show description for how you can help actors receive better protections against misuse of AI in the future. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video games deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. I have two wonderful guests with me today, both friends of the show, both of the hosts of the pre-order bonus podcast, and they just rolled in from the wasteland. Welcome back to the show, Cameron Warren and Jacob Price.
Good to be here. The wasteland is dusty and hot. This is nice.
You know, we actually live in the wasteland here in Utah because every post-apocalyptic film is basically filmed here.
That's right, yeah.
The entire Avengers video game. You guys remember that one? Remember that Avengers game?
Seminal
place in Utah.
hit game, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good to have you guys back on the show. People may recognize both of these guys from episode 72. We did The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild together, much to the delight of the pre-order bonus Discord server. And we're back today for another game. We're going to talk about Mad Max today, which is an open world action game developed by Avalanche Studio and published by Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment for contemporary consoles and PC in 2015. Some quick credits for Mad Max. It was directed by Frank Rook, produced by John Fuller, lead design credit to Magnus Nedfors, and lead programming credit to Frederick Lunn. If this is your first time listening to the show, first of all, thank you for stopping by. Here's how spoilers work on the podcast. We do not spoil the story before the spoiler section later in the podcast. So if you haven't played Mad Max, if you don't want to be spoiled on the story, and we'll talk about the story later, it's a special one. If you don't want to be spoiled, we will not spoil it until we warn you that spoilers are coming, and there's also a timestamp down in the show notes for when that spoiler section starts. So, what is Mad Max? We have a collection of elevator pitches for the top of the show. People may be familiar with the movie franchise, but we're talking about the game today. My pitch for the Mad Max game is no thoughts, no worries, just explosions and punching dudes in the face. Jake, what's the elevator pitch from you?
The elevator pitch for Mad Max is car go vroom, fire go boom.
Perfect. And Cameron?
Did you watch Fury Road? You should play this.
There we go. Agreed. I played this on PC and Steam Deck back and forth. The cloud saves worked perfectly. It took me 27 hours to beat. I did the main story and I did a good amount of side content, not everything, but 27 hours. How about you guys?
Let's see. I played this on Xbox Series X, and I do want to specify that it actually does come with FPS boost, and I think HDR, maybe upscaling, if that's a thing. Maybe I made that up if the Series X does that. It, at the very least, has FPS boost. I took, let's see, about 23 hours to complete this. Mm-hmm. And same as Dave, I felt like I did quite a lot of side content, actually. But I would say a big portion of that was mainlining the game towards the end.
There is like a lot of side content. So both of us say that we did quite a bit, but I think if you did everything, you could add like a couple dozen more hours onto the game. Cameron, how about you? Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I did 2 playthroughs of this game. Once more recently, obviously, for this show. And then probably, I want to say 5, maybe 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And played probably 15 to 20 hours then, and then played another like 10 to 15 when I played it again. So
nice.
Yeah. I actually played this game sort of close to when it came out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because people were like, "This is a good game." So when
Yeah.
I got a new Xbox, when I got a Xbox One X, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
I picked it up.
So was it just that like people were saying like, "Hey, good game," or did you have familiarity with the movies before playing this?
I knew of Mad Max, and this was before Fury Road even came out.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew of Mad Max, but mainly it was just people saying this is one of those games that has a narrative in the public gaming sphere that is like very prominent, right?
Yeah.
That people know about Mad Max, that it's that really, really good, underrated open world game that nobody played. That it is that it is like the king of that category if there ever was one. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anytime you see like something that's like, most underrated games, especially from this console generation, this is definitely on those lists. Yeah. Jake, how about you? Familiarity with the Mad Max movie franchise, and what originally made you want to play this game?
So my introduction to Mad Max as a franchise was with the movie Mad Max Fury Road. Saw that. I actually didn't see that when that movie came out even. I saw that a few years ago. Rented it because it was one of those movies that had been on my list forever. And I was really surprised, I think, at how much I really liked it. And then same thing that Cameron is sort of talking about that you're getting to. Like, this is a game that everybody seems to have an opinion on it if you've been gaming within the last 10 or so years.
Mm-hmm.
And I like threw it on a wish list, and like within a week it was on sale for like, I can't remember, $3, maybe $5, something. And this game is always dirt cheap. And so I just scooped it up. And then when Mad Max Furiosa started getting its trailers, I was like, oh man, I actually have a game of this too. I should probably play it at some point. So yeah, I didn't play it until I started it a few months ago.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's basically the same story for me. I watched Fury Road a couple years after it came out. I watched it at home and immediately was like, if they make another one, I got to see it in the theaters. So when Furiosa came out, I did go see it in the theaters, and I really liked both of those movies. And it got me really interested in like the backstory and, the factions and stuff like that in the world of Mad Max. And then kind of like you said, this game has a reputation. It's always really cheap. So I picked it up, and then, I figured it would be a fun one to talk about because it has that reputation, like one of you said, like of the, the flawed but interesting, underrated 7 out of 10 game. And I'm always looking for games like that. Like, we all want to play the best games, of course, but there is a special place in my heart for these like 7 out of 10 games that have flaws but big character and stuff like that. And to get into our little opening thoughts at the top of the show here, this is definitely one of those 7 out of 10s. But in the Deadly Premonition episode a couple months ago now, we talked about how Deadly Premonition has that 7 out of 10 reputation, but it's because like people love it 10 out of 10 level and people hate it like 2 out of 10 level. And I don't think Mad Max is really one of those games. I think that everyone who plays this, I think, is going to have a good amount of fun with it, but it's definitely like there's some stuff holding it back from being one of those all-time classics. Like, I think that the gameplay of it and like the environment and the sound design and the weather and all of that stuff is really great. And the story is like, it's real bad. It's just, it's like not part of the game for so long. There's like no story at all. And then they try to cram an entire plot into like the last 2 hours of the game, and it's bad. And so like when you evaluate all parts of it, you're going to take some points off from that if you're doing a point-based scale. But I really enjoyed playing this. It was just like at the end, the story all happens so quickly. You're like, huh, that was weird. And then, you just think about all the explosions and all the fun times you had playing it.
Yeah, I mean, Mad Max, after beating it, it is truly the king of the 7 out of 10 games. But but having had so much fun with it, like I think maybe objectively could sit down with a rubric and figure it out, and yeah, I'd probably land somewhere 7 out of 10. But personally, to me, this was like an 8 out of 10. I think it breaks the mold, just because there's too much about the game that I found to be enjoyable. There's stuff, I agree, that really didn't land very well at all. But my personal enjoyment is like, no, this is king of 7 out of 10s because it's an 8 out of 10, because it's actually above all the 7 out of 10s that it resides or reigns over. Just to put my notes in here, like I overthought this game a lot. And I think part of this is because the world of Mad Max is so fascinating as a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And that's something that you get from the movies, and it's definitely present there within the games. There's something, I'm not really going to talk about it now until after the spoiler wall, but there is a really fascinating subversion of a specific trope that has been around for centuries that I really enjoyed, but it was really poorly done. So I have a lot of mixed feelings towards that, but we'll get to that. So stay tuned.
We got time for sure. Cameron, what would you say at the top of the show?
Yeah, I mean, this is an Ubisoft style open world game with a whole bunch of mid to bad repeatable activities, but with a hell of a lot of style, and uses what I think, while it may seem overused, in my opinion, is actually heavily underused Arkham style combat system. And we'll talk more about that later, with legitimately fun car combat and movement, which I find to be actually very rare in most video games that try and do car combat. I mean, they actually really did it here. And actually, I mean, you guys say the story was bad. I thought it was fine. It isn't good, but I was entertained by many parts of it. And I can see myself eating some popcorn.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, even those parts that I was like, this is not, like, what are they even doing here? Like, what are, it's not landing or whatever. It's entertaining for sure. So, when you go see Mad Max in the movie theater, you want an entertaining ride, and this is what you get here too.
It's like if Michael Bay made a 23-hour Mad Max movie. This would
Jesus
be,
Christ. Yes. Think of the pyrotechnics budget on that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So let's listen to a bit of music from the game. We will come back and we will set up what the story is about. Mad Max has a main writing credit to Odd Algren, and it actually had input from the series creator George Miller when making the game in the early stages. George Miller, I believe, doesn't like the game, didn't like the finished product, but he was involved at some point in the production. But Mad Max, set in the desert wasteland world. If you've seen the movies, you know what we're talking about here. Portions of this game's map take place in a dried out ocean bed, which I think is a really cool setting for, desert apocalyptic wasteland. You play as Max Rockatansky, who is mad, hence the title of the movies, voiced by Bren Foster. At the beginning of the game, Max is driving across the wasteland. He is searching for a place called the Plains of Silence, where hopefully he will find peace. It's one of those things where, like, Max's backstory is, like, lightly shown on screen. Like, you can infer that he has demons in his past, but, like, they don't ever talk about really anything in the story. So it's like, you having knowledge of the movies, if you've at least seen Fury Road, will do wonders for helping you understand this character, because the game really doesn't make a whole lot of attempts to talk about Max's past. You just know that he's haunted, we'll say.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because I've dug very little into Mad Max, but it's his whole thing, right? Like there are a ton of Mad Max movies, and George Miller's been making them forever, and I think it's kind of an Australian thing, right? Like Mad Max as a franchise. But yeah, coming into this game, like, is it expected that you have that kind of pre-knowledge? And I agree with you that it is kind of set up that it's expected that you know who the character is. And I just kind of wonder how many people actually did. And I'm getting my timeline kind of mixed up. I think this came out before the reboot, right? Before Fury Road. Is that correct?
It was really close. I don't remember if it was before or after.
I'm like 99% sure, but I could double check.
Okay, but I don't know. My point being, like, how many people really knew this character? And so kind of having Mad Max start in this way as somebody who's searching for the Plains of Silence, it feels like it's starting kind of mid-adventure. He's not, it doesn't feel like he's starting at level 1. It feels like he's starting at level 15.
Yeah, it's not an origin story, for sure. Max's origin story, that's in the old movies.
Just to chime in, it did actually come out after
Fury Road.
Fury Road came out on May 15th. Mad Max came out September 1st, 2015.
Wait, of the same year? Okay, so there is potential there, right, to have some pre-knowledge going into him. But I certainly didn't feel like I felt like I should have been better acquainted with the main character than I was, right? And in part because it's not an origin story. I don't know. It was kind of a wild start, though. It certainly gives you urgency for revenge, but I think my issue was all I know about Mad Max is the dude is mad. He's pretty upset about what's happened here, and so I'm going to join him on this tale of revenge. Other than that, there was no real emotional connection to the guy.
Yeah, Max is, so like in the beginning days of the breakdown of civilization, he lost his family when, the bandits were out and stuff like that. He was a police officer, so he has like this complex about not being able to protect loved ones, and it's something that the game like makes a very small attempt to like reconnect to later. But for the most part, you just kind of like, there's this guy that kind of you go talk to, Griffa, who seems like this guy who knows about Max, but they just kind of like talk around each other when they talk. Like there's no real connection to Max's past with this story. So what you mentioned there, Jake, is at the beginning, we set up this revenge story. So Max is driving across the wasteland, looking for the Plains of Silence. He gets attacked by a group of war boys led by one of Immortan Joe's sons. Immortan Joe is not in this game, but a prominent figure in the movies. The son who attacks him is named Scabrous Scrotus. And just a quick note, fucking amazing names in this game. Scabrous Scrotus is the main antagonist in this game.
There need to be more antagonist named Scrotus.
Yeah, it's a great name.
Scrotum built into the name.
Yep. There's Scrotus, there's Stank Gum, there's Gut Gash, Pink Eye, just a collection of fucking weirdo names for characters.
Which, sorry to interrupt, but what cracks me up so much about this is you have the assumption that Max lived in our age of civilization, right?
Yeah.
And so within like 1.5 generations, people are like, the name John doesn't work anymore, guys.
No.
And we don't know if these are these people's given names. I'd like to think maybe it's not. But
what's going to strike fear into the hearts of the very few people left in the civilization?
Yeah, I don't think
Scrotus.
Dave is going to do the trick
Pink
anymore.
Eye.
Yeah. We got to go with Gut Gash.
Gut Gash. And I love the name Scabrous Scrotus because it is so disgusting and it provides such a beautiful image. And so I remember I booted this up and my wife was sitting on the couch. She was reading, and the voice acting here, everybody's got really goofy voices. So she looked up and she's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Scabrous Scrotus. What are you playing?"
It's fantastic. So at the beginning, Scrotus and his gang steal Max's car. There's a fight. Max chainsaws Scrotus in the head, but it doesn't kill him. Scrotus kicks Max off of the vehicle they're fighting on, and then Max is alone in the desert. He meets a hermit mechanic named Chum Bucket. Chum Bucket is voiced by Jason Spisak. Hopefully I'm saying that name right. And I want to give that guy credit because the voice acting for Chum Bucket is like one of the best things about this game. Like, so we'll just like give the opening setup for the game and then return back to Chum Bucket. So Chum Bucket thinks that Max is a saint sent by the wasteland to help him build his magnum opus. He's a mechanic. And so they're going to build this car that, because there's like this whole religion in the story of Mad Max where like people are like worshiping the divine combustion engine. And that's like the dominant religion in the land. And so Chum Bucket wants to build this car. They're going to call it the Magnum Opus. I keep saying Magnum Opus. And
I mean, that'd be cool too.
Yeah. He thinks that Max was sent by the wasteland to help him do it. So this is the story for like, let's say, I played Mad Max for 27 hours. For 25 hours, that's the story. Build the Magnum Opus. Collect parts, upgrade this car, make it as deadly as you can so that Max can drive out to the Plains of Silence, because apparently you can't get there unless you have a V8 engine. I don't know like what the reasoning is, but that's what they say.
There's some deep lore behind that. It's
yeah. So
watch a lot of the movies.
For a while, this is the story. There is no plot really other than everything you're doing, everyone you're helping is not in service of helping people out in the wasteland and like showing humanity. It's just upgrade the car. And so what saves this part for me is while you're driving around, Max and Chum Bucket, mostly Chum Bucket, will talk to each other. And Chum Bucket gives Jason Spisak, again, hopefully I'm saying that right, gives such a great performance as Chum Bucket. He's a little weirdo. And it's like a Gollum type character almost. And it's really good.
Oh, I love Chum Bucket. I think Chum Bucket is probably my top 5 like secondary characters list in video games.
He's great.
I freaking loved Chum Bucket. Yeah, the voice acting, but the writing also there. Like something, I'm gonna make a really dumb analogy here, but like in football, right? Like a really good receiver can make a quarterback look better than they really are. Mm-hmm. Somebody who can really just catch the ball. And I just feel like in Mad Max, Chum Bucket is that like wide receiver that will just pick any single pass that's thrown at him. So with the super, I imagine, really difficult writing to like get into, to really embody, and different conversations he's got with Mad Max, and Max, who's a much flatter character by comparison. Chum Bucket, I feel like elevates really every conversation that he's in. And so I loved Chum Bucket. Yeah, what a guy.
Yeah, Max's contribution to the story for a really long time is just basically like, hey, stay in the car, or like finding somebody and be like, I need an engine. That's his entire personality, and just being angry. Chum Bucket is where the personality really comes from in this.
Mm-hmm.
I was fascinated by, so this is, and I make this comment about the story overall.
Yeah.
I want to like know more about stuff, but I'm like, fine not. And so that was like one of the things that worked for me, is like, I'm fascinated about why Chum Bucket is this car genius, despite there being very, little access to resources.
Yeah.
And knowledge about something that, but it's also like everybody has cars, and it's like part of the whole like shtick of the game. So it's also kind of funny because you're seeing like dozens of cars and they're all trying to like kill you from these gangs. But then you're like, oh, Chum Bucket's this car genius. For some reason I was like, I wonder why anyway, it was one of those things where I was like intrigued by it, but I was like, okay, I don't need to know. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild. He is a Blackfingers, right? That's what the kind of title that he has. And he uses that as a bargaining chip quite a lot. When you get to new characters and strongholds, he's like, well, I'm a Blackfingers. And people will give him some respect.
There's clearly some societal thing around like the idea of these like crazy mechanics as like religious figures, and that was like a fascinating idea.
Yeah. I thought it made for amazing world building. For me, just real quick, good world building has coherent cultural logic. And I just felt like Chum Bucket was like a lightning rod for that. So pretty much what Cameron's saying is just that, like, because there was intrigue about what Chum Bucket was able to do and accomplish and what he meant socially to people, I was like, yeah, this is good stuff right here.
Yeah, for sure. And it ties into, again, one of those things that if you watch the movies, or like if you did extra research about the world of Mad Max, you would know about this dominant religion centered around combustion engines and shit like that. But it's not in the game. Like, you don't see people worshiping in the same way. Like, you could maybe infer that from, like you said, the way that Chum Bucket can't defend himself in the way that everybody else in the world has to. This is like toxic masculinity times 10 million in this culture. Like, people have to fight, and that's the only way to gain respect, is to be powerful. But Chum Bucket, like you said, has a little bit of that because he can fix your cars. And not only can he fix your cars, he's like a savant at it. So that gives him some pull in society in a way that, like, if you're not a fighter, nobody gets respect in this society, basically.
Yeah, it's wild because from the get-go, I got the sense quickly that Chum Bucket and Mad Max actually make an extremely formidable duo. Mad Max doesn't know squat really about cars except that V8 better, you know? Yeah. But he could take down a room of guys, you know, like pretty quickly. And Chum Bucket is not able to defend himself physically. And so this game, I think, has a lot of really good stuff about its characters and kind of tackling questions of ableism. And so Chum Bucket is one of these people who, like, physically, like, has disabilities, not going to be able to defend himself physically, but is valuable in his knowledge. And so when he's paired with somebody who is the reverse, Max is this person who has all of his fingers, for example, all of his limbs. He's a very able-bodied person, right? Kind of together, they create this pair that is actually extremely powerful within the game.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that is showcased, we'll say, like thematic stuff, like this world religion, the culture, a culture of ableism, the just general thing that, like, the Mad Max series is based on, like this breakdown of society, no social contracts, nothing like that exists anymore. It is just dog eat dog out there. All of this stuff is, like, showcased, but again, it's not a focal point of the storytelling in this game. And it's interesting, like, for some of those things, you don't have to put it on Front Street. Like, I get the dog eat dog stuff just from playing the game for an hour and a half. You see that. But for a lot of the other stuff that, like the Mad Max movies, Furiosa and Fury Road, that I've seen, they do actually, like, make that a part of the plot. And this game doesn't for so long. Like, Jake, you and I had talked about it in Discord sometimes, where I'd be like, I'm 20 hours into it. There is no story whatsoever in this game. And I was starting to think, like, is there going to be a story? Do I respect this approach to just be like, no, we're not telling a story here. It's just Max beating the shit out of people and upgrading the car. And then at the very end, they try and cram in this stuff that would, like, tie people into these themes, and it just doesn't work, in my opinion.
I think I kind of respect it, to be honest. I kind of respect just, like, it's an open world game. We're building the structure around going out and getting the parts, and maybe the writing budget isn't so good. We don't have the right narrative team. So, you know what? We're just going to eliminate the scope and make, like, the whole early portion, like, to your point, just about, like, getting parts for the car. Would it be nice if there was, like, a story that hooked you throughout and had, like, much better pacing? Like, yeah, that's what would push this game over the edge. Obviously, I think that's probably the biggest missing component. But overall, like, I thought it was fine. It was kind of cool to see the car get upgraded over time. But yeah. Plus, you had the hook of. You always had the hook in the back of your mind of Mad Max like getting revenge.
Yeah.
So you always had that. You knew that they were going to have to resolve it. And so that was one thing that kind of kept me going. Is like, okay, well, I want to see what the revenge story is. That's got to come around at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if, like you said, it's more of a pacing thing. If they had taken all of those things they tried to do in the last couple hours of the game and just spaced them out more throughout the game and let those things breathe a little bit, I think some of those things would have worked. It's just, it's really tough to like build connections with a character that I just met 5 minutes ago that now they're like, okay, you care about this character, right? I'm like, not really, Well, and he's the most quintessential like early 2000s video game character of all time, like the Max. Yeah.
brown-eyed like Jack dude who like doesn't talk a lot.
Yeah.
Doesn't
care about anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a meme somewhere of like mid 2000s or video game characters and how they all just basically they're just like the same person. He definitely fits into that category.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the revenge at the beginning, right? It is supposed to create like the big main driving sense of urgency to complete the main quest. It's supposed to accomplish that, and I agree. I don't think it does a super good job of that, in part because it's actually coupled with an equally kind of diluted main goal, which is to reach the Plains of Silence. And so, like, at the beginning of the game, Max is like, yeah, I got to reach the Plains of Silence. I'm driving him on my way there, and then he gets attacked. And, like, what are the Plains of Silence? It's a cool name, but it's also crazy vague. Like,
yeah,
there's just not really any reason for me to believe that the Plains of Silence were going to be that interesting of a goal, like of a place to reach. They don't sound that great, to be honest, because it's like you need a big enough good enough car to cross them. Otherwise, you're just lost in the wasteland and you're dead. And it's like, it doesn't sound like a compelling destination, so I'm not sure why I care. With like agreeing with Cameron, though, I was more compelled about like getting revenge on Scabrous Scrotus because he took my car, dude. That's not okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is such a non-traditional story in that way. And I actually think, just kind of summarizing your guys' thoughts on this a little bit, is I kind of think that narrative pacing was sacrificed for open world design. Because sure, going around and getting stuff to upgrade your car is a fantastic narrative thread to get you to explore the entire map, to do a bunch of side content, and to just upgrade the car. So like it works really well with the design. But like in terms of keeping me interested in why Max is a cool guy and I should be doing all this, yeah, that kind of fell off the wayside really quickly. And so my main drive, no pun intended, but my main drive for the game was the gameplay, was the open world for the longest time, because I was like, well, we're going to circle back to this, right?
Yeah.
Right?
We'll get there eventually. Like there were points that I forgot about the Plains of Silence as I was playing the game and just, going through doing the open world gameplay stuff. Like your main missions are basically you meet new stronghold regional leaders and then they send you to do open world gameplay stuff. So while you're doing that stuff, I definitely forgot what the ultimate goal was. So we've talked a little bit about like, story stuff that's maybe not great or not expanded enough or weird pacing. I want to give this game credit for like hitting something really, really well, which is maybe the reason that people are playing this game in the first place. I don't know if people are going to play a Mad Max game because they want a gripping narrative. I think that one of the draws is to play a game in the world of Mad Max, similar to like if you're playing a Batman game, you want to play as Batman. You want to be in Gotham City. And this is kind of the same way. You want to be in this weirdo world that was created for this franchise with these factions and the War Boys and like these local leaders like fucking Scabrous Scrotus and stuff like that. And I think this is a thing that was definitely a win for this game. So if plot was not a win, existing in the world of Mad Max and getting some environmental storytelling and stuff like that is a win, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would just say phenomenal world building in this game in that regard. Just you get a sense of what the world is like, what the cultures are like in the world, and why people are motivated to do whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. That stuff is fantastic. And the moment to moment writing, I loved. Like we were over here singing the praises of Chum Bucket.
Yeah.
And that kind of writing and that execution through the voice acting, all that stuff is just top tier. But yeah, I think it's kind of a rare case, what Mad Max is, where like the narrative minutia is really solid. But when you zoom out, you feel like you just miss it all, right?
Mm-hmm. There's definitely some really good environmental storytelling in that minute-to-minute gameplay of, like, we said the part of the map is in this dried-out ocean bed, so a lot of the camps that you'll be going through are built out of the husks of old boats, or, these makeshift shelters made out of, like, pieces of sheet metal and, like, chain link fence and barbed wire and stuff like that. So going through all of those, there's subway tunnels, there is like a mall that's been buried in the sand. All of these locations are really cool. And then I got to give a shout out to skeleton placement in Mad Max. It's you see the joke, the meme, I think it's a Fallout game where it's like a skeleton with its head in the toilet and it's like environmental storytelling, baby.
Yeah.
This game has that too. So like, you get a little bit of like, oh, this is what these people do with their dead. They toss the corpses in one of the rooms of their shelter and they just leave them there. That's what they do. So you get a little window into how people are living. But also there's some funny like, oh, this skeleton is seated on the nicest chair in this stronghold that you're in. So like no one else is sitting in that chair. It belongs to that skeleton. That's pretty cool.
I always got a good laugh of the skeletons sitting on chairs. I was like, you know what? They just left them there. They're just like, you know what? Or they moved them there. They're like,
yeah,
this was, I can't even think of a made up name. Like, this is Maggot's favorite spot in the house, dude. Like, let's put Maggot to rest in this spot over here.
Mm-hmm.
There's something subtle about it's crazy because this is literally a desert. You want to talk about an empty open world? Like, there's no emptier open world. But for some reason, I found it interesting, even though it was like empty, which I think speaks to just, I think, how they account, like to your point where they place the skeletons and like, why is there a ship here? And why is this area called this thing? And why does this gang have this thing? And it makes the game kind of makes you want to think about those things, which speaks to like good world building.
Yeah.
For some reason, there's something fascinating about just a massive apocalyptic wasteland, but that it has random spots in it. I don't know why, but yeah.
Yeah, it's similar to like the Fallout version of the wasteland. You go in like abandoned gas stations and grocery stores and schools and stuff like that. And Mad Max is like the leftover mega structures because everything else is gone. So like there's a couple of old houses that you can see in like some of the late game areas, but a lot of it's like, this thing won't naturally decompose because it's a giant, it's a container ship. So that's still here. It's all rusted out and it's disgusting, but people live there because it's the only place where they can find shelter from the sun and the sandstorms and stuff like that. Old lighthouses and the subway tunnels again. So finding where people are like eking out a living. And again, this is us kind of connecting storytelling and putting dots together that the game doesn't, go into like, how did we end up in this old abandoned lighthouse? Like the game doesn't talk about that stuff. This is just us putting this together ourselves, which is fine. I enjoyed seeing those places where society is, hanging on.
Yeah, I thought it was great in that you really get a sense of, well, what is this world? It's repurposed metal and it's sand. I mean, that's kind of what you've got for resources, right? And oil, right? Oil for the cars. That's something that's going to be obviously really important. But no, I thought it was really good. Just that it's a survival world, right? And while it's not really a survival game, there are like mechanics that are found in survival games that are in Mad Max. I didn't really feel like that they were that significant, but you get to see like the survival, and you really get the sense and feeling of survival just driving through the world, just seeing where people are. And I thought that was, I don't know, I really like that. I really like that. It really had, I think this is a great example of where limitation can breed creativity, where this world has really nothing in it. It has metal and sand, right? Well, what can you make from metal and sand? And I was actually surprised at how I was able to recognize different regions just by looking at them without looking at the map, because of all these different structures that are kind of left over and the way that people have made them into livable situations. And so I was super impressed with just like Cameron said, I mean, it's a desert wasteland, and that's the setting of the game, but somehow, you know, like the designers of the world were able to make this feel really diverse, even though it really isn't, even though it's quite minimal.
Right.
Also, what do people eat in this world? I've been asking myself that question for
well,
for
you
months.
eat canned dog food and maggots. Those are your
That's
two
all
options
I
for food
ate.
in this
Is
game.
that all?
Yeah.
That's all you got? That
Yep.
seems like nutrient deficient. Maybe they need some like pickled vegetables or something.
No, all the pickles are gone, man. You just got dog food and maggots.
But this
Pickled
is one
maggots.
of this game makes you think about that crap where you're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, like what do these people eat? You know, it's and maybe it's the IP, right? And maybe that comes with the IP. So
Yeah. You definitely if you start thinking about it, because the game's not going to dive into these topics, but if you start thinking about it where you're like, what do the people in Gastown eat? Are they eating corpses? Like there's not enough dog food to go around.
no, they're gonna run out of dog food pretty quick, I imagine.
The Binky Bees, right?
Yeah, the Dinky D, yeah.
Dinky D's. I got my wrong letter in there. The Dinky D's.
So Cameron touched on something earlier, and then Jake, you brought it up too, about how empty this world is. So it's a good time to talk about presentation and the way the game looks, the way it sounds, and stuff like that. Mad Max has two modes, I think. There is that quiet loneliness out in the desert, and then there is maximum adrenaline, combat and stuff like that. This game has both of those in really, really good different ways of presentation. So when you're out in the world, when you're driving around, there is no music. It is maybe just like the sound of the wind, your car engine going, chum buckets talking a lot when you're driving around. And then eventually you get attacked by warboy convoys or something like that. And then the music and everything else will like jump into high adrenaline mode. Or when a sandstorm rolls in, the sandstorms are really, really impressive and intimidating, frankly, in this. So they're very different tones that the game is striking, but I think that this game pulls both of them off really well.
Yeah, I agree. I almost wonder if at some point somebody was like, should Max's car have a radio? And the people were like, no. That would be the wrong decision because, I mean, to really get in the sense of how empty and lonely that world feels. And it's interesting because Chum Bucket is like, he's just rattling off like the whole time. The guy must have had, what was his name? Jason Spizak must have had probably like thousands upon thousands of lines to read. But it kind of filled in that space of where a radio would be. And I thought it fit much better for the world that you're in. Mad Max wants to be a lone wolf. He wants to be the tough guy doing things, roughing it alone, right? But he's here with Chum Bucket, and Chum Bucket is there to kind of fill that empty space. But in a way, yeah, like I'm repeating myself here, but that makes sense for the world. Like people in this game, in this world, they're not like spending their time listening to jazz. They're not listening to that.
There's no leisure in this. It's just survival and fighting. That's it.
Yeah, so as you're cruising in the world, you're just kind of thinking about that. You're thinking about your next objective. You're not like really stopping and looking at the sights. One, because there aren't a lot of sites to look at, but two, just like that's just not the mentality of this game, right? And I think it works super well for what this game is doing.
Usually I'd want Chum Bucket to shut up, but like in God of War Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Where they just talk, and it's like, stop. Like, please stop. Chum Bucket, I was actually like, yeah, like, because they don't give you like any story, so you're kind of getting like all your context from Chum Bucket telling you stuff, which is both bad and good, but I was fine with it. And then you randomly like run upon a car and smash it to bits or something, and it has to reset the dialogue tree.
Yeah, it is a little bit frustrating. Like every time you load the game back up, Chum Bucket has the same line about what your main objective is at the time. So if you haven't done main story in a while, you're going to hear Chum Bucket's line like many times as you as things kind of reset, as you said. But so like you're driving around empty, just the sound of your car engine, maybe the wind, something like that, and then maybe there's a convoy of cars, or maybe there's like, there are ambushes set up from the war boys around. And then suddenly it's like car horns blaring, like drums come in pounding. The combat music in this has like kind of like a tribal chant to it, which is really good. You know, fits the world of Mad Max when, you know, society has devolved down. Like there's no fucking violins in the world of Mad Max anymore.
Not
so
a one.
Just fucking drums and car horns and chants.
I'll just comment on the car. And we'll talk about the gameplay in a little bit, but the presentation of just how it feels to drive the car. And I don't know if it's like the motion blur or I don't really know how they pulled it off, but this game like could it's almost like they had a car game, almost like a Horizon style thing. And then they just stuck the combat, like the Mad Max pieces like on top of it. And then that was kind of how they built the game, because they do the car presentation and how that all that feels like so well. It's super, super impressive.
They really sell the feeling of going fast out in the desert, and like the wind whipping through and everything like that. That
piece of like feeling the intensity and like feeling the speed, and that's with nothing around you to like earmark your vision, right? Like you're in the desert, and somehow they did something like some visual trick that just they nailed that.
Yeah, and that's even if you're just driving out there, like not to mention when you're in car combat. That's just if you're driving, they sell the speed and stuff like that really well. Yeah. Real quick, want to credit people who are involved in the presentation. So the lead art credit is to Martin Bergquist, and the music credited to Mats Lundgren. So shout out to both of them for creating this atmosphere that works really well. Again, on both of these axes, calm loneliness and frenetic adrenaline.
Yeah. I was just going to repeat what you were saying earlier, Dave. I think the first time I was caught in a storm was just an absolute highlight, because the storm looked incredible. You could see it rolling in, and I was sitting there trying to gauge how fast it was, where it could go for shelter. But then, you know, there was, I think probably Chum Bucket saying, ooh, but sometimes there's huge drops of scrap metal in these. And so I was like, oh, man. I was like, you know what? I saved recently. Let's try my luck out in this storm. And in addition to like music and the presentation, the audio design, man, just hearing the like rip roar of the wind and the lightning strikes, and then just seeing all these massive crates just barrel out of nowhere and crash into things, and just like other like warboy cars sort of coming in, and they're trying to get the scrap as well too. That moment for me, I think, was a perfect moment of frenetic adrenaline, where it was like, I'm driving in my car, I'm trying to do car combat, I'm also trying to harpoon one of these crates so it doesn't totally blow away, and I'm dodging lightning bolts all at the same time. Like it was pure chaos. But it was so satisfying to kind of weather that storm, right? To get through it after I'm being pushed and pulled all over the place, and to take down a few cars and then walk away with a few crates. Like, that to me, like that was the far end of the spectrum, was just pure adrenaline And yeah, just all those elements like you're pointing out here, the music and the just visually how that all looks. And then I'd like to add in sound design. It created just a wonderful, wonderful gaming moment.
Yeah, the sandstorms are deafening. Like they're louder than anything else. And it's like, like you're in an actual storm. Like it's this sustained, really loud sound. Chum Bucket warns you when a sandstorm is rolling in, and it'll say something like "better get to shelter" or some Chum Bucket ism or something like that. Yeah. And then, so like the first time that happens, you're like, well, "It's a sandstorm," but like I'm playing a video game, so like, how bad could it be? And then it rolls in, and you're like, "Oh fuck!" Like this is serious, and especially if you're like trying to do something during a sandstorm, that like Mad Max Fury Road level of adrenaline right there. Like fighting in car combat during a sandstorm is like white knuckle adrenaline. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Can I quickly just comment on Mad Max Fury Road? Literally, probably maybe the best action movie that I've ever seen.
It's great.
Right.
Probably. Like, And it comes down to the car combat on film being executed like so well as to be, you literally ask yourself while you're watching that movie, like, how did they do this? Like, I don't understand how they even pulled this off. This game like actually does a pretty good job of capturing that. Now it's nothing close to like what that film does, but it's pretty dang good.
Yeah. You don't have the same options in like variety in like how to attack, we'll say, but it is really good. This is our chance. Let's listen to a bit of that combat music from Mad Max. We will come back and talk about what it's like to actually play this game. So, on the subject of car combat, that's the first part of this. This is the thing that makes it stand out from all the other open world games with, checklisty activities to do, is one of your main things that you do in this game is car combat. And so what you do is you start out with this, piece of shit car, and you collect scrap as your currency, and you use that to either upgrade the magnum opus or to upgrade Max's character's stats himself. So on the road, you'll often get attacked by Warboy cars. Some story missions will put you in car combat. These were often my favorite story missions, especially one at the very end, which is like an assault on, we'll say a special car. We'll just leave it at that for now. So what you do is you got a couple things you can do in combat while driving. Max can shoot his shotgun out the windows. You can shoot out tires. You can shoot, if somebody's exposed, you can just shoot the driver. You can bash cars either from behind, or you have a special button to do like a side bash. So you can like ram cars off of cliffs. You can, if somebody's stopped and you do like a speed boost into them, you'll do a ton of damage to their car. You can shoot gas tanks. There's a harpoon that when you upgrade it, you can pull up wheels off, you can pull doors off to expose the driver. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, like without actually like getting out of the car, we'll say, while you're driving. This is like awesome. The entire game, every single time some cars attacked me, like with the exception of like, if they were like much more powerful than me, then I would be like, okay, I should probably like try to escape this. But every other time I was super excited, like, okay, fucking bring it on. I'm ready for car combat. It rules.
Grappling, hooking a dude out of his driver's seat is incredibly satisfying. That's
it's great.
Enough said on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the harpoon in this game, and thankfully you get it really early on, became such an amazing tool, like in all this car combat. I was super impressed with how this is pulled off, because One, I'm a skeptic when it comes to just like racing games. They're typically not my favorite. My favorite one I've probably ever played is like Forza Horizon 5. I loved that one. That was really great. And so trying to juggle two things at once that kind of feel like they're opposed to each other, which is like combat in a vehicle while you're driving and driving that vehicle at the same time. Super impressive. Yeah, I quickly was learning that like I couldn't solve all of my problems just by like speed boost ramming into people because their cars have different defenses as well too. And so that's where the harpoon really came in. That was an easy way or the best way to strip armor off of cars. Like Cameron said, sometimes the easiest way is like, dude, if I could just hit this driver and pull them out of the car, he's dead and no one's driving the car. You know, like, and so I love that you could really employ strategy. And typically there was actually as high adrenaline as these car chases and battles were, there was enough time to think through a strategy and to kind of like tactically take down a fleet of cars. Yeah. And so as I was leveling up my car too, I became more and more interested. There are like mini bosses that will go on different convoys. Yeah. And you get a specific reward if you take down that mini boss, and they're surrounded by a bunch of cars in their fleet. And so like starting in the mid to late game, I started doing a ton of those because I was like, you know what? One, this is really fun. But two, like I just got this upgrade to my car. Let's see how it works in action. And so one that I went out of my way to get was the flamethrowers, the flame. I think I can't remember what they call it, but anyway, the flame that shoots out the side of your cars. I like went out of my way to get that because I ran into a few enemy cars that had it, and I was like, dude, I'm getting annihilated. I need to do this to them. And so I unlocked that upgrade, and I was like, okay, well now I have this another tool in my kit, and if I'm riding alongside people, instead of just side bashing them over and over again and kind of losing steering and handling of my car, I could just flame them. I could just roast them. And it was so much fun to have a bunch of tools that worked and that mapped really well into the controls as well. It didn't feel like a hassle for me to do that on a controller.
Yeah, it felt good. You mentioned those convoys. Of all of the different types of open world activities, the convoys were my favorite. And it's just because like it's like a 1-on-6 car combat encounter with like a boss vehicle in the middle. And it's not necessarily that like that boss is more armored up or more powerful than the other cars, but like that's your target that you have to take out in the convoys. And I loved doing those convoys because it is a bit of strategy. Like you can't just rush in and ram everybody. You will get destroyed if you do that. Like the other cars are capable enough, and not that the AI is like super smart, but like if you are, stopping and reversing and trying to turn around, like while you're going really slow or while you're stopped, they will ram you and fuck you up. And if you get out of the car when enemies are still in their car, they'll try to run you over too. And you have to like dodge and dive out of the way of incoming cars. It's just a lot of fun and never really got old.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I don't know. Is there a ranking of like best car combat in video games? This has got to be up there, right?
I can't even think of, like, there's racing games where like that's Twisted Metal, right? I never played Twisted Metal.
Twisted Metal, which they canceled the remake. So obviously they couldn't figure out car combat.
I can't think of another open world game like with driving that has car combat like this.
The comparison I wanted to make was Arkham Knight. But that car combat is annoying.
It's like the least favorite part of that game for everybody. Is the car stuff.
it's like annoying, and there's a lot of car combat sections, and the game keeps trying to tell you this is really fun, and it's not. It's just like I just want to get back to being Batman.
Yeah. In this game, like I think the melee combat is really fun, but the car combat is like it's the star of the gameplay, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think part of that too is like the car combat works incredibly well in this world where environmental hazards are present, but it wasn't like I was trying to fight off 6 cars in some like, I don't know, inner city street, where suddenly a stoplight is going to just catch me out of nowhere, halt me, and then I'm like stuck sideways trying to Austin Powers, pull forward, reverse my way out back onto the main critical path. There's like enough like latitude here that you can just you can think, and that's what I really liked about it. Is like you mentioned, like you can like I did this a lot actually, is you'd shoot people's tires and then just they would get really drastic pull where their tire's missing and they would just go over a cliff. And so like being able to like think that through, being like, okay, I shoot out this tire, I hit the brake, they skid in front of me and go over the cliff. And then I harpoon the guy in my, behind me, I rip him out of the car, whatever it is. Like there was enough physical space to accomplish all that in a way that made sense. And I think that's a big part of it, is like the arenas themselves where you're doing this car combat. They had environmental hazards, and yes, they had lanes that you're supposed to be in, but there's just so much more space to work with, and which makes sense because you're in a car. This is not melee combat.
That might be, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't played enough of Arkham Knight, but like, you have so much, you're in the desert. Like, there's nothing, there's rocks and cliffs and stuff, but you have a lot of space. You can take the fight off road if you want to. And if you're in Gotham City, what, you going to run into a building?
Yeah, the way they get around that is they turn it into like a tank game, essentially, where you start to be able to move laterally, but then that's no longer really like car combat. It's like
gotcha.
It's just like vehicular tank combat, which is different and not as fun.
Yep. So car combat, big win. The on-foot combat follows the Arkham style of combat, and if you haven't played, it's basically you press an attack button to do combos, and then enemies will kind of wind up. You'll get an indicator that an attack is coming, and you press Y on the Xbox controller to do a parry counterattack move. And the cool part about this is that both this and the Batman Arkham games have really, really fluid animation between all of these things. So, there might be some unnatural movements of like snapping from attack this guy to counterattacking this other guy who's coming at you from this weird angle, but it's all really smooth in the way it flows together for the most part. And it's a really good, like in the Batman, fights and Spider-Man fights, because they use those, and those Lord of the Rings games, they use this combat system. It's a wonderful combat system for like 1 versus 15 like melee fights. It's just really good for fighting multiple enemies at a time. And it's not like, I'll say the same thing I said in the Arkham Knight episode. It's not that interesting from like a technical perspective of like what you're doing, really. You are, if you look at button presses, you are pressing X 75 times in a row with the occasional Y. But it looks really cool. This game is just as bone crunching and brutal in the combat. You're breaking arms, you're breaking legs, you're smashing skulls. Turns out to be fun. This is not a perfect combat system. Action game fans might be left a little wanting from it, but it looks cool. It does the job for Mad Max.
Yeah, it totally does the job. I think this Arkham system it's just fun. It's satisfying to see the little icon pop up and hit the counter button. Like it's like simple, dumb combat fun. There's nothing complex here. There's no strategy, but it's fun to hit the button and like get the feedback of blocking and then punching a guy super hard in the face.
Yes.
So like, I think from that perspective, very simple, but very fun. I found the, similar to like Arkham City and Arkham Knight. I wish there was like maybe a little bit more here with the combat. It kind of just serves as a thing to do when you're in these like little open world activity sections, which I found to be a total drag. But the like the walking sections I personally found to be incredibly boring, except for the parts where you're just punching people in the face, but then it makes you do other stuff. And I'm just like, nope, I just want to keep punching guys in the face.
Yeah, I might be the dissenter here. This got really stale for me pretty fast. But just let it be known, like, I wasn't a huge fan of the one Batman game that I played, in part because this combat just isn't my favorite. I do like it best in Spider-Man because in Spider-Man, he's doing backflips and he's got web shooters and he's got a billion different gadgets, right?
True.
And so there's a lot more variety in terms of what Spider-Man is doing versus Mad Max, which is punch, parry, break an arm, But that aside, when I started leveling up Max and like having more weapon durability, for example, I don't know. I got used to it and I quit complaining about it when I was more leveled up. But yeah, I don't know. This is not my favorite style, but I agree. I think from a design perspective, it makes a lot of sense if you want to put Max in a room with 15 dudes and have him be the tough guy to take them all down.
Mhm.
I mean, this is probably the best system to do that without him being a superhero. So,
Yeah.
So subjectively, not a huge fan of it, but objectively, like it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, this is the combat system for superhero games. Maybe if you want to do like a new God of War type system, but those are not great for fighting, dozens of people in one encounter either. Like this is the system if you want to have big superhero fights. And Max is not a superhero, but he kind of is. Like he's the strongest guy in the wasteland. Like,
oh yeah,
the War Boys really don't stand a chance. The War Boys are really fun, like basic fodder enemies too. Just from their design, they're just these insane people who live to fight. That's their purpose in this world, is to fight. And they got like the body paint and all of that stuff. They're great as just basic enemies to fight. Mm-hmm. The part where this combat system doesn't work so well, in my opinion, is the boss fights are just not very imaginative. There are a couple that have like little extra environmental interaction mechanics in them, but most of them are just big dude with a big weapon. That's all they are. And there's a bunch of them in like open world camps that have their own boss fights. There's a lot of them that are just literally the same guy.
Yeah, when I got to my third, I think, boss fight from these camps, and I realized it's pretty much the same. I was like, okay, so you just got to wait for the right time to press Y, wait for the right time to mash X, get out of the way, and so I don't know. It's kind of, I'm mixed on this. I wish there was more variety.
Souls game, Jake. Why can't you just enjoy it?
I want the variety that Elden Ring has in every single game.
It's a Twinkie. It's not a ribeye. Okay, that's what it is.
Hey, I love the car combat. I don't know, man. It just didn't. Yeah, it just didn't do it for me. I actually did like the dungeon level design, though. I liked being able to zip around and just finding different corridors and blowing up extra doors to like get different rooms. So I didn't mind doing those like encampments and clearing them out because one, you get, the rank reward. You decrease threat
you
level.
You lower the Scrotus threat level.
Yeah. They were super beneficial, and I think
it's good.
Scrotus threat level.
I think the reward, incentivization to do all of the content in this game is amazing, and so I kept going back and clearing them out. But by the time they were over, I was like, okay, I need to do something else for a sec, and then I'll do another one.
Yeah. So in the open world, there are camps to clear out. There are these, they call them scarecrows, but they kind of are. They're these big wooden structures or metal structures with dead bodies hung on them to scare people, I suppose. Kind of like a scarecrow if you think about it. But you go out and you destroy those. There are snipers out in the open world to go take down, kind of classic open world stuff. The cool part about most of those basic open world things, like the scarecrows, the snipers, stuff like that, is most of them take 20 seconds tops to do. If you don't miss with your aim in the car, you hit it one time, they're gone. And so the way you destroy them is by ramming them with your car. And often ramming them with your car will launch you off of a ramp and you'll get airtime, and Chum Bucket will have a line about, "Oh, Saint, she's airborne," or something like that. And so I'm doing something that is very, very simple and checklisty, but I'm doing it in the most fun way possible, smashing it with my car at high speed, and it takes 15 seconds to do. So I didn't mind destroying scarecrows or sniper posts or something like that. I also didn't mind the camps because the camps have a really interesting like perimeter defense system where they'll have like snipers set up or like flamethrowers set up, or there will be like a you know, like for lack of a better word, I forget what they call them, but like a thing that'll launch bombs at you if you're too close to it. And if you get too close and you don't take out the defenses, then it will power up the camp and make it harder to do. So like there is like a little bit of a stealth aspect to like eliminate the camp's perimeter defenses, then go inside, beat the shit out of all the people in there. I thought that was pretty fun. And if that starts to get stale, the designs of the camps themselves, like I said, this is built into an old cruise ship. So that's cool. Like going through these decrepit structures is really cool. I didn't do all the camps because there's a lot. And I did get tired of blowing up, you know, oil tanks at some point. There's like 3 different types of camps. So they could have had more variety in what you're doing in there. But there's enough factors that make them fun and interesting that, and like not to mention the reward you get is more scrap to power up the car so you can be better at car combat, make Max's fists more powerful so you can break more bones, stuff like that. All of those together, I was pretty motivated to do a lot of this open world stuff, more so than in Assassin's Creed Odyssey or something like that.
Yeah, I think the open world in that way is just designed super smoothly. You can pick an objective. You could probably do 3 or 4 things on the way there, and it's going to take you very little time to accomplish those little pit stops on the way to your destination, whatever it is that you're aiming to do. Something else about the big encampments, though, is that the really big ones typically had somebody outside that you could talk to and get information on about the camp.
Yeah.
And so they might say something like, oh, there's a secret entrance. I think it's over on this side. And if you were to adhere to that, you could get into like a critical part of the encampment and do some massive damage without like alerting defenses or the perimeter defenses or whatever it is. And so I like that aspect where it's like, this world is just so rewarding. It was so rewarding to do all this stuff, and it took so little time that I found it really hard actually to mainline this game. In certain moments when I was like, okay, well, let's just do this because I know this is going to help. I know this is going to lower threat level. I know I'm this close to this. And so the game, I couldn't even tell you exactly how it does it, but I think it managed really well the different levels and systems that you're working with, and being able to give you just enough reward and incentive to do these things that you're like checking things off in a pretty regular pace.
Cameron, what'd you think of the open world stuff?
Yeah. I want to be able to check the checklist off faster. Here's what I didn't like. I didn't like going into the camps and having to go find stuff. You know what I'm talking about? I can't remember the exact context or like what type of mission, but when you go into the bases, you kind of need to like search around for things.
Yeah.
And I didn't like, I wanted to just like run in the camp, kill some people, and like get out and check the box, because I was invested in upgrading the car, and it felt like having to go search for stuff was just bad padding, and I didn't like that. But I'm also someone who's very impatient with games, and if I hit even like a moderate amount of pushback, I start to get frustrated, especially in a game like this where it's literally just the dopamine hit of riding around, upgrading the car, and seeing car number go up, right? And that's kind of what I wanted from this game. And when the activities got in the way of that, I was like, nope, I'm backing out. I'm gonna go do something else.
It's definitely one where, truthfully, there is not a lot of variety to what you're doing in the open world. But I think there's enough factors that, for me, made the things that you're doing interesting enough to make me want to do them. And then, like we've all said, the reward of upgrading the car fits in with the story, but also from a gameplay perspective, it is rewarding to upgrade the car, because car combat's not easy. So I need more defenses. I want more spikes on the side. I want those flamethrowers, stuff like that. And you need the currency from doing side content. And a lot of those car upgrades are actually locked behind like either main story progress, or they will unlock like reduce the Scrotus threat level in this region to a certain level. Then you can get this upgrade. Or yeah, they do incentivize you to do a lot of that side stuff. So I would say there were 3 regions that I got the threat level to 0. Absolutely. And like when you reduce the threat level to, like there are less war boys that attack you when you're out driving. So you see that effect of that. It's not just like a meaningless number that goes down. And then like the late game regions, I got them all down to like threat level 2 or 3, basically. I got to a certain point where I was like, these are still cool, but I've done enough camps. It's time to finish the game.
Yeah, something else I noticed too is like when the threat level goes down, and I don't know if this is tied to how powerful your car is, people will just get the heck out of Dodge if they see you.
Yeah, or like if there's like 3 cars and you take down 2 of them, the third one will run away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that kind of interactivity, just seeing how people respond to those different things. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a really amazing open world. There's only one, I think, bottleneck really, and that is the jaw, which this is believe it or not, this is a story event. I didn't really realize where it fit in until after I made it through. But basically, they just kind of lock you to a specific region until you accomplish a specific main quest, right? That I think to me was the moment, and I bring it up now because that was the moment that really sold the car combat on me. I was like, I didn't realize that you could make like a boss type encounter and have it be car combat like this and have it be this much fun. And just for context, you're in a specific arena and you're battling different cars, and essentially you have to take down this giant gate. But I thought that would, for me, that was like a hallmark moment of like, oh, everything I've been building towards, like as I've been working on my car and as I've been doing stuff in the open world, here's actually a payoff for all that right now.
Yep. There's one later that's like the final boss for car combat, and it's really fun. Like it's just a win. The gameplay, in my opinion, is really good. It was what kept me playing this, despite the fact that the story did almost nothing for so long. So let's get into our closing thoughts here before the spoiler section starts. So we always answer the question in this wrap-up part. If you have any wrap-up thoughts, closing thoughts, let them out. But also, who would you recommend play Mad Max?
So I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I hesitate to give this a 7 out of 10. I mean, it's funny because I think I've actually been the most negative sounding out of the 3, but I freaking loved my time with this game. And I personally think it's an 8 out of 10, and that makes it the best 7 out of 10 game. Because
Truly
it doesn't
the
actually,
king of the 7 out of 10 games. The 8 out of 10.
The 8 out of 10. I mean, listen, it's got a lot of highs and a lot of lows, which I think is when we talk about the quote-unquote 7 out of 10 game. Like, it's a really thoroughly enjoyable experience, but it has really markedly low points. But yeah, I don't know. This one, maybe those highs were so dramatically higher for me that it just has to be better. But I would recommend this game to anybody who wants a fresh spin on the open world format, simply because you're in a car, and that is a big difference. Like, it's as dumb and as simple as that sounds. Being in a car in an open world game has a dramatically different feel than like other open world games. And the other reason I'd recommend that is, and we've talked about this too, it's just driving the car. The feedback that you get in your hands, that you get in your ears while playing this car, going fast feels good. Hitting a boost feels amazing. Flying over a ravine, harpooning something out of the air was one of my favorite things to do in this game. I always looked for like scarecrows. I was like, is there a ramp nearby? Is there a cliff nearby? Yeah. Because I kept trying to get the perfect 30-second clip of me just flying through the air, slow-mo, harpooning a scarecrow, and then taking it down just like midair. Those kind of moments like that, really dramatic, lots of flair, lots of adrenaline. sometimes they're hard to find, I think, in open world games. And this one manages to have them.
Nice. Cameron, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, Mad Max, fun, easy to play, standard, your sort of standard open world game that I think actually holds up really well in the PS5 Series X era, especially on the Series X with all the bells and whistles, upgraded, HDR, all that jazz. If you like any of the Mad Max movies or any like post-apocalypse games at all, and even more if you like anything to do with like cars and video games, I couldn't recommend this enough. Jake and I back a while ago did like an open world episode, and we didn't talk about this game, but I think if we did that episode again, this would definitely come up.
Yeah, I did an open world episode on this show too, and one of the things that we talked about is like exploring the world has to be really interesting, or traversing the world has to be interesting. Ideally both, but one of those has to hit. And traversing this one is definitely really, really fun. So even if the things you're doing are repetitive or simple, if you really think about what you're doing, it's just fun to get around. It's fun to drive the car off ramps. It's fun to blow shit up. Like, that's what you're doing in this game. So if that sounds appealing to you, then I recommend you play Mad Max. And then the obvious ones, of course, if you're a big fan of the movie franchise and you want to live in the world of Mad Max for 20 to 30 hours, like, play this game. It's a really good experience of doing that. And it doesn't like tie in with the story of Fury Road or Furiosa, but you are in the world, you're playing as Max, and the story of Mad Max is full of just real weirdo, hyper aggressive characters, and this game is full of them too. So it's a pretty easy recommendation for a lot of people, and it's really cheap, and it's available on all modern systems except the Switch. So yeah, it's really hard to like point to someone who would like not like this game at all. Like if you don't like driving in games, then don't play this, I guess. But I think that this one's fun enough to even, if you don't like driving in GTA or something like that, like it's very different in this game. So easy to recommend this game. So before we get to spoilers, we have housekeeping to do, and we always start by talking about what the guests are up to. So like I said, Jake and Cameron host a podcast called the Pre-Order Bonus Podcast. It is a show that I listen to all the time. So guys, tell the people about the show, maybe highlight some recent episodes that you want to send people towards, and tell them where they can find you.
Take it away, Cameron.
Yep, Jake's handing the... Yeah, Pre-Order Bonus Podcasts. We're wherever podcasts are getted. I don't know. What we do is we usually talk about one game per episode, similar to the Backlog show here. Break it down, gameplay or game design, narrative, and then kind of our spin. I think maybe that we tend to talk to maybe more than other podcasts is impact on the industry. So we spend a lot of time like talking about what does a game mean to the broader industry. If it's an old game, like what did it do and how did it change things? And yeah, I mean, recently, Jake, what are some of your favorite episodes from recently?
I would recommend that you listen to probably our most recent one. I think now is the Metaphor Refantasio prologue episode. And so recent is a little relative because this is recorded a few months before it's come out. But I highly recommend you listen to that one because that was something that really caught Cameron and I off guard. That is not a game that we typically play, yet we decided to dedicate a whole episode to the demo there. We also we actually had John from Gaming in the Wild on to talk about Star Wars Outlaws. And so this is another open world game. This is another one based off of a movie franchise. And I think that will be another enjoyable one to listen to. And then since the airing of this episode, our Game of the Year episode will have been out.
Right.
And while I'm doing a little bit of precognition here, that one is going to be quite an exciting episode to listen to.
Should be, yeah. Yeah, it's a quality show, and I love listening to it. Basically, every episode that comes out, even games that I'm not interested in playing myself, because I like the formula, and it's you follow the formula, talk about the narrative, talk about the mechanics, talk about the impact on the industry, and it just makes it a very easy show to like. I know what's coming. I know what the discussions are going to be here, and the way you guys talk about it, I really appreciate. So recommend that everyone go check that out. And links will be down in the show notes for the pre-order bonus. Good show again. And if you want to support this show, you can leave a rating and review if you listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. If you are listening on YouTube, please like and comment. That helps out. You can join the Discord server. I know there's people in the Discord server that have played Mad Max. So it'd be fun to talk about that. Maybe if you do have some fun clips of explosions and stuff, feel free to share those with us on Discord. And if you want to support monetarily, you can do that at patreon.com/RealDaveJackson. And one other thing, my other podcast, a top 3 podcast, we do top 3 lists. It is a fun time, very different vibe from this show. So if you want to listen to that, you can find that. It's called a Top 3 Podcast. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, it will be full spoiler time for Mad Max. All right, before we get into spoilers for Mad Max, I have actually 3 guest appearances to let you know about if you want to hear me talk about games on other shows. On the Still Loading podcast, I was a guest to talk about The Last Guardian. On Friday Night Gamecast, I was a guest to talk about Metaphor ReFantazio. And I was a guest on the Gaming Together podcast, talking about mouthwashing. All of those discussions are worth your time, so please check down in the show notes. There will be links to those shows. Go check them out. Support the creators of all 3 of those shows, Still Loading, Friday Night Gamecast, and Gaming Together. Also, I want to say thank you to the patrons who help support the show. Big shout out to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Vicori, Jill, Jeff, formerly Jerf, Kieran, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, David Stecco, Stefan, William Prentice, Drellish, Rob Smith, and many more. Thank you all for your support so much. It means the world to me, and if you're listening to this and you want to be like them, you can go to patreon.com/RealDaveJackson. And with all that being said, let's get back. Full spoiler time for Mad Max. All right, we're back, and it's full spoiler time for Mad Max. Cameron had to jump out, so it's just Jake and I here to close out the episode and talk about the story in Mad Max, maybe a couple of memorable missions along the way. And so, like we said in the non-spoiler part, for about 25 of my 27 hours playing this, there was really no plot movement. It's just Max meets new people, but it's all in service of upgrading the car. So it's not tying in with his personal story. There are no relevant characters introduced that, Max cares about or anything like that. It's just upgrade the car. And then a little bit later on, they do start to try and tie stuff into both Max's internal struggle from his past and then try to test, like, has Max actually made connections? Does he actually care here? So the 2 parts where they do that, they do it with Chum Bucket, and then they do it with these 2 side characters that get introduced named Hope and Glory. Hope is a slave woman and Glory is her daughter. And the first time you meet Hope and Glory, I think, is in an optional conversation. Like, you're walking through one of the strongholds, they're in a jail cell, and they're like yelling at you to come talk to them. And I can't remember, like, does it force you into the cutscene or can you just keep walking? But like, you don't have to talk to them. You don't have to do the side quests they give you, stuff like that.
Yeah, you are forced into a cutscene, and then you're given the side quest, and you can choose to ignore it. And I gotta say, I knew that Hope was supposed to be an important character because she got her own cutscene. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But like,
Yeah.
outside of that, this was a really awful introduction to a character. Basically, you're in the second area. I think this is what is the Gut Gash's stronghold?
Yeah.
And she's in prison there, and she's yelling at you to come closer. And she's like, "You got to help me get out of here. You got to help me." Well, up until this point, you know that Mad Max is a lone wolf, and he doesn't even really care for Chum Bucket. And so I'm watching this cutscene, and I'm like, why am I supposed to care? Like, as a character, why would this person, Mad Max, care about this woman, Hope? And what he ends up doing in the cutscene is he like gets a piece of scrap and he like kicks it into the cell with the assumption that she can use it to jerry-rig her way out or something. It's a little too vague.
And then he just leaves. He's like, this is not, like, are you fucking take this, but this is not my problem.
Yeah. And yeah, it was, I mean, there was like no reason to care about Hope. Hope didn't come across as like an interesting character to get to know. And I'm actually really frustrated by her character design because she's supposed to be like this beautiful woman with massive boobs in a tiny shirt. And that is the reason why I'm supposed to save her. Like, I felt like that was all the game kind of gave me, was like, hey, she's kind of hot when everybody else here has like 50 nails poking through their skin as some type of like post-apocalyptic hardcore punk. And it really bothered me to be like, oh, Max, look, sex. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of interpreted that scene. And I was very quick to walk away. I was like, I guess she's probably supposed to be important because this is a cutscene, but I was like, dude, I have no motivation for like any real reason to pursue the side quest.
Yeah, I thought she was just a side quest giving NPC that got her own name in a cutscene, like you said. Like, there are other characters that give you side quests, and then you do the side quest and you never talk to that person again. And I thought this was what that was going to be also. But you bring up a good point now that I think about it. There's like maybe 3 women in the entire game that get like names, and one of them is like super old. She's one of the stronghold leaders. I think it's Pink Eye.
Yeah, Pink Eye.
Yeah. And then there's the like crazy one that you team up with during the race in Gastown, and then you have to fight her in the arena.
Oh my
gosh,
then
there's
I'm
Hope.
blanking on her name.
I can't remember her name either. It's something weird because of course it is. But then, yeah, like you have Hope, who's the only, conventionally attractive woman in the entire game. And so what they're trying to do is give Max a surrogate family so that he can they're trying to tie this into Max's backstory where he lost his wife and young child when civilization started to break down. So, and he's closed himself off to the world after this. Nobody gets in. That's why he's so gruff with everybody. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to help anybody. He will only help the stronghold people because they will help him upgrade the car. That's it. He's only working with Chum Bucket because Chum Bucket's going to help him get to the plains of silence. He doesn't care. And so they're trying to introduce these vulnerable characters, like Max gets a second chance at having a family, at protecting someone like he couldn't do before. But the problem with this storyline is you do that thing with Hope pretty early. It's the second stronghold. And then in one of the other strongholds, very late in the game, I think it's Pink Eye's stronghold, gets attacked and Hope gets kidnapped. And I didn't know she was there in the first place.
Yeah.
She's in that cutscene getting kidnapped by Stank Gum. And I was like, oh, she's here? And then she gets kidnapped. So she's gone. You can't form a connection with her because she's gone. And then you rescue her. You do a couple missions very late in the game, and then she dies, very quickly.
Yeah.
Her daughter, Glory, gets kidnapped. you have to go into this place called the Underdune, which is a mall that's been buried in sand, which is really cool place to go do video game stuff. You go like rescue her. There's a really fucked up like child slavery work situation that they got going on, having the kids dig in the sand for buried stuff. But then they die like right away. So there's like this assumption by everybody involved that Max wants this new family and that we want this and that we're going to be devastated when they get killed. But it all happens so quickly that like they're here, then they're gone. Then they're back, then they're gone. And you never get a chance to get connected.
Yeah. The pacing is so bad on this and kind of coming back to an earlier point that I made and something we talked about when we first talked about the narrative was the real sense of urgency that you get to want to be Max and to play the game and play his story is this revenge on Scabrous Scrotus.
Yeah.
And that kind of falls off because Scabrous Scrotus disappears. And the second one, right, is the main goal of the game, which is to reach the Plains of Silence, which you also quite quickly forget. And then the third one, if we can call it that, is Max's internal conflict of who he is and how he's supposed to be a protector, and how he no longer is that, and what you're getting at, like where he no longer allows himself to be vulnerable. And the Hope storyline is supposed to be like the narrative progression of that third like main sense of urgency or like urgent storyline.
Mm-hmm.
But Hope is not likable. Her quests are all optional up until the very end. And so I feel like making her quest line required would make players maybe get invested in Hope as a character and to see her as somebody who is like a potential to join Mad Max and his crew and to kind of help him get this like mental healing, this psychological healing that he is looking for. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself, I think is kind of problematic. Hope, I think as a character is just super problematic because she serves as a narrative device for Max, like entirely.
Yeah.
And then the later missions, right, where she kind of realizes that Max actually doesn't care about her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, will you at least save my daughter? And he's like, no, that's not my problem. I think that's a direct quote from the game, actually. But then she's like, I have to bargain with this guy. Hey, I will give you this information if you go get my daughter. And he's like, fine, I'll go get your daughter. And so their relationship has been purely transactional, like all of the relationships that Max has ever had.
Yeah.
And so despite this like attempt to present Hope and Glory as this, like you're saying, surrogate family that kind of helps Max achieve this psychological healing, the narrative bones simply are not there. There's no narrative foundation for that structure to be built on.
Yeah. If they wanted us to care about Hope and Glory, and if they wanted we'll say like an effective, natural way to kind of like chip away at the shell that Max has put up around him, then they needed to space this out, and you needed to do multiple quests with Hope throughout the game, and you needed to have this thing slowly erode to the point where Max can, accept somebody else as like an important part of his life. You get like, there's like one cutscene when you're rescuing Glory from the Underdune where there's like a very brief moment where you're like, oh, Max kind of cares about her and he wants to save her. But then you save her, you drive back to the base, and they die immediately when you get back there. So it's like, so the devil's advocate to this would be like, Max shows the slightest bit of care and then it's ripped away from him right away. And it's like this tragic event. But it just, I don't think, like you said, I don't think the foundation was there to make us really care, because the proportion of this game where there's none of that versus the proportion where like, oh, they're trying to make us care about characters now, is so off that maybe I had just like closed myself off to caring about characters in the same way that Max did. I went through this 25 hours, 90% of the playthrough of this game with zero care or connection to any character. Like, I thought Chum Bucket was funny, but like Chum Bucket dies and I didn't like feel bad. Like, I felt bad because of, Max betrayed him and like that sucks. But like, I wasn't like, oh no, I love Chum Bucket, I can't believe this happened to Chum Bucket. Like, this isn't that kind of game and story. Maybe that's to an effect to harden us in the same way that Max is, but I think that would be a kind of extra romantic way of looking at this.
That's what if this game had to go in one of two directions, and one of it being Max settles down with hope and glory and forms his family and, becomes healed from his trauma. I don't know. I don't think it would have worked, honestly. I think it would have been it would have been too predictable. And I do like that this game broke the mold. And so I have these really silly notes in here. So everybody bear with me as I do this. My background is in Latin American studies. And part of that means you have to go to Spain, obviously, and Spain's history, because Spain, colonized Latin America. That's another tale for another time, right? But part of the colonization efforts of Spain were brought upon because of very extreme Catholic traditions and beliefs. And this game reminded me a lot of something that we see a ton in Western culture films, which is this idea of the divine family, a mother, father, and a child.
Yeah.
And this comes from like Catholic medieval art. There's something, it's called the triptych. And basically it's like this fold out stand. And it would have 3 panels on it. And there's a panel in the middle and then hinges. And then there's 2 panels on the side. And oftentimes this was used to represent the number 3, which in Christianity is the number of the Godhead. Yeah. And so part of that is the divine family, which would be like Mary, Joseph, and then baby Jesus, right? And so this sort of idea of completion and wholeness being associated with a 3-member family, oftentimes the child representing the future and hope for the future, right? And just the good things that can kind of come just in future generations. That has been something that has been ingrained in a lot of media, right? As an expected happy outcome to something ends in the divine family. And so Mad Max is like, screw the divine family. Mad Max is no saint, right? By any means. Up until the very end, he is willing to let anybody die so that he can go out with his V8 engine in the plains of silence. And so I do think that it is like, it would have made for a really fascinating story to consider Mad Max as like, no, it is so possible for humanity to become so broken that something as long-standing and traditional as the divine family does not hold any sway over somebody's moral compass. And so I'm like, I love the idea of in Mad Max, in which hope and glory both die. Max lets Chum Bucket die, and he sticks with his original plan of just being the solitary lone wolf. But frankly, like, there was no emotional attachment. It was more like, wait, what just happened? Oh, they just died? Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
And because there's like nothing that like built into any type of expectation for how the game would end, like subversion works best in storytelling when it's subverting expectations. But if there are no expectations to subvert, when you have these big moments of subversion, nothing actually happens. And so that's my big gripe with this game, is that I think narratively it could have done something really fascinating, really like atypical, but instead it just washed out.
It's like the bones of the story are there, but they're spaced out in a way that doesn't make any sense. They don't form a good skeleton. If I'm following along with this this metaphor. Like, I think that, again, I think I said this in the non-spoiler part too, and I'm probably repeating something I already said in the spoiler section, but with what happens in this game, it's not that like what happens isn't good, and it's not like the story and like the way that this ends could never have been effective. It's just the pacing of it all and the lack of time to let you form a connection to characters that you're supposed to care about is not there. And the character they do give you time to form connections to, Max and Chum Bucket, Max is so hopeless for all of the game that I think, like you said, if they want to subvert expectations, they need to first build expectations. And I didn't play this game with the expectation that Max was going to soften at any point. And maybe it's just because you are, well, that's not true. He does help in Fury Road. He helps people. He's definitely more open to that in Fury Road than in this game. Yeah. But the Mad Max universe is not really a universe where happy endings would feel natural. So it's not like, again, it's not like it's bad that all these characters die and Max sacrifices Chum Bucket so that he can further his goals. That's not bad. It's just like they spent so long sidelining the story to such a degree that it made it impossible to care about anything, really.
Yeah, it's a shame because, I think it could have done something really interesting there and really provocative, right? To just have Hope and Glory die. And these names, I mean, all the names in the game, right? They're really spot on. Yeah. But naming the woman Hope and then the child Glory, that's what made me immediately think of the Divine Family, that sort of Christian trope in storytelling. Because I was like, folks, this is so deeply embedded in like Christian literature and tradition. Like it had to be those names. It could have been anything else, right?
Contrast Hope and Glory also with Scrotus and, Pink Eye and the other character. Again, I can't remember that other character's name that you race with, but her name is real weird too.
Yeah.
But yeah, Hope and Glory for sure. Yeah. So the other part of this is Max selling out Chum Bucket. And it's a good time to talk about like how this game ends. So, one thing that I thought was kind of cool is before the end of the game, Chum Bucket sells Max out because Chum Bucket realizes that Max doesn't care about him, and Max is using him to build the car so that he can then take the car alone to the Plains of Silence. And Chum Bucket thinks that this car is like this holy artifact to him. And he says that it would be blasphemy to take it without him, to separate him from his holy artifact. So Chum Bucket sells Max out to like the antagonists and is just like, well, all right, fuck you. Like, you don't care about us. You don't care about me. You don't even care about this car. That's probably what he's the most angry about is like, you don't care about this holy thing that is my entire reason for being. So Chum Bucket sells him out. And I thought it's interesting to have someone in the story have agency for once other than Max. But it doesn't go anywhere. Max finds him really quickly, gets the car back, and Chum Bucket is like, I want to get your take on this. Like, reluctantly along for the ride for like the last couple missions. Like, he knows he knows that he can't forcibly separate Max from this car, but he's still going along for the ride because he doesn't want to leave this car.
Yeah. I mean, Chum Bucket for me, I grew really attached to. So when he died, I was pissed, actually. I was like, Max, dude. I was like, you go over to that ravine and you fish Chum Bucket out of there and you bring him back here, and revive him or whatever. I loved this moment because I loved Chum Bucket. Chum Bucket to me symbolizes just what happens to a person when they're just abused their entire life, right?
Mm-hmm. And he's the most human person in this game.
Oh yeah. I 100% agree. And so when you have to do this mission, I was kind of annoyed. You're supposed to drive in a car that's not the Magnum Opus all the way back to the very beginning of the game because that's where Chum Bucket is hiding out with the Magnum Opus. And you can just fast travel, which I thought which I actually I checked if I could do it and then I did it because it was late at night, which I actually regret doing and I wish it would have made you just drive the whole route.
Yeah, like a long, angry drive, just like stewing on the fact that this guy betrayed you, stole your car, But yeah, you can fast travel to like 10 seconds away from the entrance.
Yeah. So it does, suck a lot of air out of the room. But Max goes in there, and like I mentioned in the non-spoiler section, Chumbucket and Max make an extremely formidable pair because of what their different skill sets offer and how they complement each other.
Mm-hmm.
So when Chumbucket sees Max arrive, to me, it's like Chumbucket knows that Max could kill him in less than 2 seconds, especially super powerful Max, who's leveled the heck up by the end of the game, right? Chumbucket doesn't stand a chance. And Chumbucket, like everybody else in the wasteland, must survive. And for Chumbucket, survival often means submitting. And so for me, I found this to be a really powerful moment where Chumbucket finally was able to exercise power over Max in a way that he was able to actually affect Max. Max is a super powerful, abusive, with like a manipulative, emotionally abusive character towards Chumbucket. So Chumbucket finally gets his revenge. But as soon as Max shows up, Chumbucket can't do anything. And so I kind of feel like Chumbucket is like, well, this is it. And he does it for the car for this point forward, right? The only thing Chumbucket, I think at one point did revere Max as a saint because he calls him saint, the whole time as he's talking about this. But by the end of the game, I think Chumbucket was in it for the car. He was like, no, this is the magnum opus. This is my life's work. This is what I was, divinely appointed to do, if you will, right? And so he is there and he becomes not really Max's like black fingers, but he becomes a servant of the magnum opus. And so his death with the magnum opus is sort of fitting in that regard. Chumbucket died. He didn't really die in his own terms. Max let him die, and he could have been saved. But at the very least, he died with dignity, knowing that he died with his life's work.
Mm-hmm. That is true, yeah. So what happens is, in the last mission, Scrotus is driving this giant vehicle, and there's a convoy, and you have this car combat final boss where you have to take out all the guard cars and then take out this giant vehicle that Scrotus is driving. It's really fun. I liked it a lot. And then they get to the end of this cliffside, and the giant vehicle is like teetering on the edge of a cliff. And Max decides to ram it and knock it off the cliff to kill Scrotus. Chumbucket's in the back of the car, and Max is like speeding up to ram this thing. And Chumbucket's like, whoa, what are you doing here? And Max bails out of the car, lets it crash into the big thing with Chumbucket in the car. And then Chumbucket's laying there in like a pool of gas that then catches on fire, and he dies. That's how he dies.
Yeah.
And then
not with a lot of dignity, I guess, but
well, like you said,
with the car.
I mean, I don't feel like a lot of people in the wasteland die with any shred of dignity at all. So at least he got to die with the magnum opus, like you said.
Yeah, right.
The big land mover vehicles like falling over the cliff. Scrotus drives Max's old car, the Back in Black, I think it's called, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you have like a final boss fight where you have to throw explosive thunderpoons. Thunderpoon is a really weird word to say.
Yeah.
Not sure that I like it, but you have to throw the thunderpoons at him to beat it. And Max kills Scrotus, takes the car, and just drives away. And that's the end of the game. So like, it is interesting in a way that you have this character who, when you talk about dynamic and flat characters, Max is the flattest character of all time. Nothing changes with Max throughout the entire game, except for one little blip when he's like, I'm going to save this kid from slavery. That's the only thing. But where Max is at the beginning of the game and where Max is at the end of the game is exactly the same place. I got my car. I'm driving to the Plains of Silence. Fuck everybody else.
Yep. So with my students, so I teach introduction to like literature classes, just for clarification. And with my students, when we talk about character development or characterization, I say, in good character development, you have a character that is given opportunities to change or evolve or learn something. And so bad writing would be you have a character that has zero opportunity to change. Because then the character, if they do something that doesn't make sense, it's, you know, it's out of character and it just feels inconsistent or illogical what they're doing. And with Max, at the very end of the game, yes, he's given moments to change and he rejects them, which is an option for character development. But I would still consider him an extremely flat character precisely because what is he actually gained or learned or changed by the very end? Actually, nothing. He's got a few more, you know, he's got some more blood on his hands.
Yeah.
But that never bothered him before, and that certainly doesn't bother him anymore, right? And so, yeah, to kind of get back to a point I was saying earlier with this stuff with Max's character development needed to be sprinkled there throughout the entire game.
Yeah. So they do that with Griffa, right? Or that's the time when there's like this guy who knows about Max's past, and there's like real small conversations about like, you actually like killing people. You like violence. It's the only time that you get peace from what's going on inside your head and stuff like that. But they're so abstracted, like the conversations, there's no learning going on. And then Griffa is not, like, I thought Griffa was going to be a character that played into the main story at some point. He's not. It's just like flavor conversations when you go to upgrade Max. But there's no, like, the person who could have worked in there to like kind of work with Max a little bit about his past or kind of explore some of these things or make Max talk about these things. Even if Max's dialogue is like, I don't want to talk about it. It's too much. I can't handle it. Like, Max doesn't talk in those conversations that much. It's just kind of little bits of flavor. And so, like you said, when Max has opportunities for character development, learning, stuff like that, and he rejects them all, like that, it is interesting to think about him as a character who has the chance to grow. So like, he had the chance with Hope and Glory, but it was ripped away really quickly. And so he could have then been like, well, maybe I should be nicer to some of these other people that are in my life and helping me. But he closes everything off. And like, that's an interesting choice for a character. But it's like we've been saying, like, all of this stuff happens so late when I had gotten to this point in the game not really expecting anything to happen in the story, really. So it's too condensed toward the end to really like be affecting, I think.
Yeah, and I actually looked up to see if there are multiple endings to this game, and there are not. So, which again, I don't know if I don't really have I guess I'm kind of neutral on that. I think if there were multiple endings, and if like you had done the side quests with Hope throughout the game, that she ends up alive and you end up joining her, like, okay, that would have been cool. I do like the ending in that, like, it is very reflective of kind of what survival means more than anything else in this world. Like, that's how crappy things have gotten, that survival first and then other people is actually further down the line. It's probably like survival, nice car, nice plump maggots to eat, and then people, right? Like, that's all that really matters. And so, yeah, that theme is really, I don't know, capitalized on, I guess, at the very end. But it was just like, I don't know, I guess this brings me to something with a larger thought, or a thought that I've had across media more broadly, with the use of violence, just as a technique or as a plot device. And violence tends to be used in extremely moralizing ways, right? So like at the very beginning of an action game, you very quickly in most movies, for example, or most books, there's some sort of moral justification for why the protagonist gets to kill. And it's because, this, right? During the Cold War, it's like, well, they're communists. And it's like, okay, yes, we get to kill them, right? And
they killed John Wick's dog. So
they killed, like, you don't kill animals, right? That is bad. Killing a pet, that is awful. Therefore, John Wick is allowed to kill all these mobsters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it tends to be really moralizing in that sense. And in Mad Max, right, with what I don't know how I feel about this exactly, but how is violence moralized in this game? It is so violent because you're killing people left and right that I almost wonder if there is no like moment narratively where there is a moral stance taken on violence. And so when Hope and Glory die, it's like, that's just how things are.
Yeah. I think that like the moral reason for violence in Mad Max is that is the only way you survive in this wasteland, is by killing anyone who poses a threat to you or your shelter or your resources or it's not even like someone who poses a threat to your loved ones. Like nobody has loved ones in this, not in this game. So I think there's an inherent like license to kill in Mad Max in the world because that's the only way to survive. And that's post-apocalyptic fiction. That's basically every post-apocalyptic story that I can think of right now off the top of my head is post-apocalyptic fiction removes all of the artifices of society and reduces humanity down to a more basic level of survival. And that more basic level of survival includes violence is justified because that's how you survive now. And I think that's how it is in Mad Max. But you're right. Like, you're not shocked. Maybe that's why I wasn't even shocked when Max lets Chum Bucket die or when Glory and Hope get killed, because you're just like, yeah, nobody survives. Like, isn't it telling that you meet one person over the age of 30 in this game? Like nobody survives this world.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's just, I feel like a lot of narratives, they use that moralizing moment towards violence so that it dictates the reader or the viewer how to feel when specific people die.
Yeah. True.
And how they die, right? Like, oh, if this person was killed by this type of person, I am mad or I am sad because it shouldn't be that way, right?
Right.
Yeah, in Mad Max, because the rule of the land is, kill first, shoot first, ask questions later, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's hard to feel like, not saying that it was okay to kill Hope and Glory, but I am saying that I think in the game, because there's no reason to have a reaction to it. It doesn't give you any. It doesn't even posit that because even in a lot of post-apocalyptic movies or books, there typically are family units, and that's still respected.
Mm-hmm.
But in Mad Max, it goes out of its way to be like, nah, even the family unit doesn't exist.
No, it's just clans of dudes, really, and then the powerful people have women who are childbirth slaves, basically. That's the role of women in most of the Mad Max stuff that I'm aware of, with the exception of the character of Furiosa. Yeah. Really. And then that is what Hope is when you first meet her in this game. And maybe there's an expectation that you're going to feel a certain way about Hope and Glory dying because they're the only innocent people, really. I don't know, if you think Chum Bucket's not really part of it. He's just trying to make cars, man. He doesn't give a shit about killing people, but...
Dude, don't involve my boy Chum Bucket in any of this. The man just wants to make the magnum opus.
He just wants to make a nice car. That's all he wants. But Hope and Glory represent innocence, I guess. And so it is probably fitting that they get snuffed out as soon as they become plot relevant, because there is no place for hope, pun intended, in the world of Mad Max. And so as soon as Max himself has that chance, it's ripped away from him, and he wasn't really into it in the first place. Max is not really interested in redeeming himself.
No, he's not. Yeah. And it's funny. I think something you said helped me put into words some of my thoughts and feelings towards these characters is Chum Bucket better for me represented innocence and victimization of or victims that are created from this world and in this culture and this post-apocalypse in the wasteland. And so when he died, it emotionally resonated with me much more than when Hope and Glory did.
Yeah.
Because my interactions with Hope and Glory, or the way that I perceived them in the game, is Mad Max is like, "Hey, you're in prison again." She's like, "Yeah, dude, you got to get me out. This is what you got," And then finally, we've already talked about this. She's like, "Hey, you got to save my daughter." "No, that's not my problem." And then she says, "But I'll give you something in exchange for it." "Okay, I'll do it." Right?
Yeah.
And so I agree. I think Hope and Glory are supposed to represent the kind of innocence, and I think literally they're supposed to represent the sort of wholeness, and it's physically represented in that it's only Max, Hope, and Glory that have like a body that is complete, if you will. I'm trying to avoid ableist language here, but a body that doesn't have any, I don't know, missing fingers, missing toes, or anything on it. Like visually and physically, they're supposed to, represent something that is whole and complete, but it's simply, they did not. I mean, they did not for me anyway.
No.
But Chum Bucket did. Chum Bucket to me was like a very complete and whole human. Still mad about it. I'm still mad about my boy Chum Bucket, man. I love that guy.
I agree with you definitely that there are kind of two approaches to this opportunity for redemption for Max, an opportunity to chip away at that wall and form connections. One of them is with what could be a friend and a true partnership at, like you said, very complementary skill sets for surviving out in the wasteland. Max can protect Chum Bucket, and Chum Bucket can build the ultimate car, which then helps Max do what he wants to do. And then Hope and Glory represent the family that Max lost in his second chance at having a family. And on the surface, you might assume that family draw would be the better storyline. But I agree with you that Chum Buckets is actually the better storyline in the way it's delivered in the game. Definitely the one that, like, when Hope and Glory died, I wasn't sad. And I wasn't sad when Chum Bucket died per se, but I was like, oh shit, Max let him die. Like, he really doesn't care. Whereas Hope and Glory, I was like, well, shit happens. Like, that's how it goes. So yeah, I wasn't sure we were going to get much mileage out of the story here, but the world of Mad Max is so interesting. And frankly, that's why I wanted to play this game, because I watched Furiosa and then I rewatched Fury Road. And then I read a bunch of stuff on Wikipedia about all the backstory in the Mad Max universe. And I think it's fascinating. And it deals in a lot of like really interesting thematic elements. And it's interesting now that we're in the spoiler section, we can talk about how these are presented and like the connections that they're trying to make in the game, and like how a lot of them didn't land for either of us, but that interesting meat is still there to talk about, just inherent with the world of Mad Max.
Yeah, and honestly, that's why I think narratively, it's such a shame that a game has such amazing world building, because this world is very well constructed. But yeah, it's just the way that the characters moved within that world, and the way that the plot events sort of lined up in this game and how they were paced out. It's like, yeah, we're able to have a lot of conversation about this game because of the world building and less about the actual story beats within the video game, which to bring in the movies, right, which is Mad Max Fury Road. I mean, holy cow. I think it does a really remarkable job of building those characters and creating maybe not emotional attachment, but at least empathy and understanding for what is happening and why characters are making specific decisions, and kind of where that leads that story. And I don't know, you watch the movies and you want to see that in this game. And I mean, I really enjoyed this game, but it was the gameplay more than the story.
Yeah. So it's like, it kind of sucks. Like the majority of the praise for this game came out in the non-spoiler section, where we're just talking about like, hey, it's really fun to do the car combat. The world building's great. The environment design is awesome. Like the weather's, the sandstorms and like the skyboxes are really interesting and all this stuff. And then when we get in the spoiler section, we're like, let's talk about how this game approaches its themes. That's when we get into the part where we're like, I don't know about this. Could have definitely been better, but this has been a really fun time, man. I appreciate you, and Cameron had to go, but I appreciate Cameron as well, taking the time to come on here and talk about this game with me. It's one that like, I don't see a lot of our podcasting community doing shows about this game, doing analysis of it. So it was fun to play it, but it was equally fun to get on here and talk about it with you guys.
Yeah. I can speak for both of us when I say it's always exciting when we get to chat with you, and it's really exciting when we get to do an episode. It was a lot of fun being able to pull this one out of my backlog and be like, all right, yes, I have to prioritize Mad Max now. Good.
Yeah.
And it was very much worth the game and the conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those games that it can sit in the backlog because like, this is going to sound more damning than it actually is, but there isn't a lot that like jumps out and is like, no, you have to play Mad Max right now. Like this is going to be awesome. It's get it out of the backlog. It's just one of those games that can just kind of sit in the Steam library because you picked it up for $4 and you're not super incentivized to play it. You're not feeling an open world game. I mean, it sat in my Steam library for a long time too. So always a nice little bonus when the show can be the reason that we actually get around to playing some of these. So thank you guys again. Reminder for everyone who's listening at the end to please check in the show notes for the pre-order bonus podcast that Jake and Cameron do. It's a really good time. And as you're maybe listening to the music that plays us out of the episode, go find a couple episodes of the pre-order bonus to listen to. I was on the show a couple times. Jake and I did a Chained Echoes discussion, and then we did Sea of Stars on the show too, right?
Yes.
There we go. 2 games that are very fun to compare and contrast right there. Chained Echoes and Sea of Stars.
Last second, when Dave asked earlier episodes that we recommend, I should have said the Sea of Star ones. And part of that is not just because Dave is on it. That's actually one of our highest listened to and reviewed episodes.
Fun.
We've gotten some of the most positive feedback on that episode specifically.
I like to hear that because that was not the most positive episode as far as our opinions, or at least my opinion of Sea of Stars. So I'm glad that people appreciate the discussion. So yeah, one more time, people, please check out the pre-order bonus podcast. And if you've listened all the way to the end, as always, you are my hero, and tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Welcome to No Small Games, the indie gaming recap and review podcast. I'm Kate, also known as Cater Blossom.
And I'm Emily. You might also know me online as The Specific Egg.
And we met streaming and playing video games on Twitch.
At No Small Games, we combine our favorite genres to experience everything the indie game world has to offer and share it with all of you. We believe there are no small games, only small game studios.
Each episode, we'll choose one indie game that we each played separately and discuss our playthrough experience together.
The good, the bad, and our most memorable moments. We'll follow our recap with a review and announcement of which indie game will be featured on our next episode.
We invite you to play each game along with us and would love to hear from you about your playthrough experience.
Hey, Kate.
Hey, Emily.
I hope that No Small Games brings everyone some big fun.
Do you have a gaming subscription service like Xbox Game Pass or a crazy backlog and don't know what to play next? Well, 1H1D might be for you. Join me, Chris, and my college buddy Tom as we play a random game or a requested game for an hour and decide if it's worth playing past that hour. We go over the good, the bad, and maybe some little tidbits about the development you might not have known. Got 30 minutes? Give us a try, and if you like it, throw us a 5-star review. Try something new. You never know what might be your next favorite game.